From the Times and the Sunday Times, amid much pomp and pageantry, this is The Story. I'm Manveen Rana.
President of the United States with the King entering Windsor Castle.
A procession of royal carriages, gun salutes and an enormous guard of honour. More than 1,000 troops were assembled in Windsor as Britain pulled out all the stops, with the largest military ceremonial welcome for a state visit in living memory. But not everyone was lining the streets to welcome the president.
Donald, you can't hide. We judge you with genocide.
He's in Putin's pocket. He's making the war in Palestine worse. He's supporting Netanyahu, Christo-fascism in America.
His actions are causing instability, overturning the world order that we've got used to. He's the most dangerous man in the world.
Today, Donald Trump will be swapping the state carriage for the Beast, the presidential limousine, as he rolls into Chequers and the real business of the state visit begins. What are the political wins and pitfalls to look out for? Will this visit save Keir Starmer? And will the spectre of Jeffrey Epstein eclipse it all? The story today. The Beast arrives. Trump's state visit.
I'm Katy Balls. I'm the Washington editor of the Times and Sunday Times, and I'm in London. I've just come back from Windsor, where the president is arriving today as part of the state visit.
Katy, paint a picture for us of the scenes in Windsor. We've sort of seen protests, we've seen security at the max. What was it like?
So we've had a situation where there's been some, as you say, forms of protest in advance of the president arriving. So pictures of Jeffrey Epstein, the disgraced deceased financier, projected, laid on lawns and being removed, quite soon after they go up. But I have to say the crowd on Wednesday morning ahead of his arrival was fairly muted. There weren't really that many people there. Now, this was ahead of his arrival. But, I met one ardent MAGA supporter in a Trump was right t-shirt and a MAGA hat. There were quite a few locals who had turned out, not really for or against, more out of curiosity. And then I think in terms of how Windsor itself looked, you had huge US, UK flags really everywhere and lots of bunting up. So it was a very kind of slight village feel, but obviously bringing the transatlantic energy up that the visit is meant to be about.
And Katy, as our Washington insider, just to give us a sense of how important this state visit is for Donald Trump. How big a carrot was it for the British government to swing in front of him?
Probably the best way of putting it is, I think it is substantively really important for the UK government. I think for Donald Trump, this is seen as an honour. He sees it as a big compliment, and he has definitely been pleased by the invitation. And therefore, in terms of a carrot that the UK government could offer, this was one of the best tools they had to really try and boost further UK-US relationships, because we know that Donald Trump loves the monarchy, and also it's quite a personal love of the monarchy because he, in a way, inherited it from his mother who grew up in the Outer Hebrides. He's very proud of his Scottish heritage, and his mother was an ardent royalist. He has recalled, I think, about age 6, watching his mother watch the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. And I think his dad was like, this is boring, get it off. And, she just did not look away. So there's a personal connection, how he views the royal family. And therefore, when you've spoken to figures in DC ahead of this visit, they will say he is incredibly excited and animated for this visit. But I would say the US side see it more in terms of, look, Donald Trump gets to meet the royal family. And also he can now say, he is the president who had 2 state visits. And who else can say that than necessarily about the business deals, which is what the UK government is more focused on. Not to say the US don't find that important. That's clearly an aspect of this. But I think of the parts of the visit, the Wednesday, which is the pomp and pageantry, that's the most important bit, I think, to the president.
And it is a historic honour being given 2 state visits, 2 big state banquets, 2 big honours with the red carpet rolled out and the royal family all there to welcome him. We know that attachment to the royal family, that he's clearly inherited from his mother. We know it's particularly strong with the last queen. Is he still a fan? Is he still a fan of the royal family? And are there potentially political differences with the current king?
I think he is very warm towards the current king. So you're right to say, if we look at it on paper, there are potential political differences. And then again, if we look at King Charles's views on alternative medicine, perhaps there's some parallels with Maha, the Make America Healthy Again movement. If you're looking for some common ground in some areas, I'm sure there are a few conversation points they can have. And there's also definitely a few conversation points they would probably be best to avoid because of the difference of views. But I think Donald Trump has spoken very positively about the king. You saw it in the comments coming over. And there's probably a question mark over Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. I don't think that's where Donald Trump has been the most positive in the past. But then again, you look at the current mood in the royal family, that may not be such an issue.
And give us a sense of the scale of this visit. I mean, how big is his entourage and who are the people he's brought with him?
So in terms of the size of the entourage, it's quite a long cast list. So he has his daughter, Tiffany Trump, and her husband. You also have Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff, who also leads on policy. And then the press team, as you would expect, Caroline Leavitt, his spokesperson, Ambassador Crowley, who often does lots of the kind of ops organisation on these events. And then we're also expecting some members of the cabinet.
And quite a lot of big business figures, tech titans.
Yes, and I think that's one interesting aspect of this, which is on the state visit, you would expect them to bring people who are relevant to what is being discussed, what is being announced. And therefore, because one of the big things that both sides want to talk about on this trip is this tech partnership, you've seen Donald Trump also bring with him lots of Silicon Valley billionaires, Sam Altman, others from the AI world. And this is all part of this £42 billion tech pact. So I think at this state banquet, we would expect to see the monarchy mixing with the political and the political mixing with tech world. And that will be a very notable dimension to this visit.
Although notably no sign of Elon Musk. You mentioned the state banquet. That's obviously for the Trump team. That's the big event. That's the pageantry they'll be looking forward to. What are the other key points in this visit that we should watch out for? I mean, a lot of Westminster watchers are particularly interested in the joint press conference that happens on Thursday afternoon.
Yeah, when I was speaking to diplomatic sources about this trip, I was like, what are you most looking forward to? And they said, well, the Wednesday is probably the calm before the potential storm. The reason being there aren't many microphones. It is largely very visual. You're going to have Donald Trump arriving at Windsor Castle, various processions and so forth. We are expecting the president to visit the chapel on the grounds of Windsor Castle where the Queen was laid to rest to pay a tribute to her. We know how fondly, to your point earlier, he has spoken of the Queen. And then you have the state banquet, which of course will be a very grand moment, though it is worth pointing out the last state banquet, if we're going to talk about potential pitfalls, figures involved say it was during that state banquet when Donald Trump had been a perfect guest, really, very polite, very gracious. And then all of a sudden, during this banquet, this interview drops from The Sun. And he'd given an interview to The Sun newspaper in which he had ultimately criticised Theresa May, praised Boris Johnson, and all normal codes of diplomacy gone. So I think there's always a chance that we're not expecting that at this state banquet. But the point where it gets a bit potentially more risky for both sides is the Thursday, which we expect to spend most of the day at Chequers, various meetings, culminating in a joint press conference where you have the US press, the UK press, and you never quite know with this stuff how many questions there are going to be. Donald Trump can just go on and on. I've seen it myself in the White House press briefing room. If he's in the mood, he is almost the ask me anything president. But that is the point where I think potentially a bunch of awkward topics could come up, which have differing levels of heat for both sides. So For example, I think that for the UK side, if Donald Trump is quizzed on what does he think about the UK position on Palestinian statehood, what does he think about freedom of speech in the UK, what does he think about Nigel Farage? Is Nigel Farage looking like the next prime minister and a potential winner?
Yeah.
All these kind of things could be quite uncomfortable for Keir Starmer. I think what would be uncomfortable for Donald Trump is Epstein. And because this visit has been first and foremost seen as a great honour for Donald Trump, something that I think he will think if my mother was looking down on me today, and perhaps he thinks she is now, she'd be very proud of him. If this press conference, if you think about the departure of Peter Mandelson, he was sacked over emails dating back many years to Epstein. If that comes up and that's then a way into what does Keir Starmer think about Donald Trump and Epstein? What does Donald Trump think about Peter Mandelson and Epstein? What does Donald Trump think about Epstein? I think that is probably where there's a risk it could start to taint how the trip is seen from the US side.
There's a lot of potential awkwardness there. And Katy, this visit does come days after Peter Mandelson was sacked as the British ambassador in Washington. You interviewed him out there. Give us a sense of how much of an impact that'll have on this visit. How important a bridge was he to the Trump administration? Was he well liked?
So I think he was an important bridge. And on the state visit itself, he's all over this. Peter Mandelson may be gone, but the tech partnership was something he was working on and really leading the charge on. When it came to the planning of the state visit, probably more than in previous ones, Peter Mandelson working with Warren Stevens, who is the US ambassador to the UK, working in lockstep to really find common ground on these various announcements. And they were picking up work, which they'd done on the UK-US trade deal to get it over the line at the time. So I think if we just look at this practically and take out, obviously, lots of people in the UK felt there was no possible way Peter Mandelson could stay when those emails came out. But practically, I think that it probably doesn't impact the state visit too much because so much was in motion. So the plans were pretty much made. But they are plans that Peter Mandelson was heavily involved in.
It'll be really interesting to watch where that goes. Katy, you've recently moved to America. You know how much we talk about the special relationship here in London, in Westminster. Does that term mean anything in America, particularly now under President Trump?
Yeah, I think it does, because also, if you look at this administration, I think you can make the argument they are more Anglophile. They take a closer interest in Britain than several administrations that came before. If you think about Joe Biden, he had such a close affinity with Ireland. Similarly, Barack Obama, the Democrat Party often has those links. And this administration, if you think about the summer we've just had with, Trump in Turnberry to kick it off, J.D. Vance in the Cotswolds for his version of a summer holiday. I'm not sure most would count that many work meetings as their version of a summer holiday, but it was a holiday apparently. And then, of course, Donald Trump back now. And you look at what the State Department has done, sending various delegations to investigate free speech concerns in the UK. They take a very active interest in the UK. So I think it's a double-edged sword, whereby because they are so interested in the UK and actually do view this relationship as special, it means they have a lot of opinions about what they do, sure, but also what they don't like.
I'm Oliver Wright, policy editor at The Times.
Oliver, our policy editor, our man with his ear to the ground in Westminster, just give us a sense of what the mood's like there as this state visit begins. We've already had comments from the Mayor of London. How are parliamentarians feeling about it?
I think it depends which parliamentarians. Certainly, it's no surprise that quite a lot of them, particularly on the Labour benches, are deeply sceptical, probably a polite way of putting it, about Donald Trump. But I think there is also a realisation that Britain's relationship with the United States is absolutely critically important to the economy, to defence and security, and a feeling that this is the devil that you have to deal with. Now, Sadiq Khan perhaps is an exception to that. I mean, he and Trump have a long-standing history of enmity, and actually, politically, it does neither of them any harm. So Khan come out today and said that Donald Trump and his coterie have done more than most to fan the flames of divisive far-right politics around the world in recent years. And I imagine Trump will hit back at Khan at some point, and it will be business as usual.
When this state visit was conceived, when it was unveiled with great fanfare and a letter from the King during Starmer's visit to Washington, it was sort of seen as a great gift, a real triumph to be able to hand to Trump. It's the first time you've got a second state visit. It's something we know he really cared about. Some people did think that maybe we'd offered the biggest carrot we had for Donald Trump and for influencing his behaviour. Maybe we'd offered it too soon. Is it too soon to be inviting him here?
I don't think it's too soon to be inviting him here if you are Sir Keir Starmer or the Labour government. For them, they've got a 5-year term in office. If you want to see some of the benefits from giving Trump, fly past a state banquet at Windsor and all the other sort of pageantry that comes with a state visit, you need to get it in the diary early. You need to work up the details of what you hope to get out of that visit, whether that be investment here, a better trade deal there, because in order for it to actually have an impact on the UK economy, which is the absolutely critical thing as far as the government's concerned, you need those deals signed early, because after they've been signed, they're going to take quite a while to come into effect and even longer to actually have an impact.
And yet this state visit has come at a time when Keir Starmer is in real crisis. How will that play into these couple of days?
I think that's what Downing Street is dreading, because the thing you have to always remember is that Donald Trump has his own Jeffrey Epstein problems, and the fact that Sir Keir Starmer sacked Peter Mandelson less than a week before Donald Trump was due to turn up in the UK was bound to put that on the agenda of the media, if not of the talks themselves. The worry for Downing Street is that this dominates the press conference between Sir Keir Starmer and Donald Trump at Chequers, and that it becomes a distraction, and that actually it irritates Trump, and that some of the sort of goodwill that they hope to build up by the sort of pageantry gets lost because it all becomes about Jeffrey Epstein and the various different relationships which both Mandelson and Trump had with that man.
And Oliver, we're talking on Wednesday just as the state visit is all kicking off. We do think that press conference on Thursday afternoon will be crunch time. That's when we really know if this meeting has been successful or not. I suppose for Keir Starmer, there's also a fear that, Donald Trump does seem to like a strong man. He does seem to like a winner. And the press, certainly, if you were to read reports of what's happening to Keir Starmer's government right now, this week is not a good week for him.
No, absolutely. And if you go back to when Starmer was first courting Donald Trump, when he was newly elected on a huge landslide victory, a lot of what people were saying at that point was that Trump was interested in Starmer because they might be not of the same ilk politically, but for him, Starmer was a winner. But he arrives in the UK and Starmer looks anything but. And they are not natural bedfellows. Their politics are not the same. And the question is, does Trump allude to that in the press conference, which he is more than capable of doing? Does he talk about some of Starmer's policies, which really the Trump administration don't like, particularly around areas like freedom of speech? Does he embarrass Starmer? How does Starmer present himself with Trump? I suspect the press conference will be a very tightly controlled affair. There will be a very limited number of questions on both sides, maybe even just a couple of questions on each side, maybe a few more, but it certainly won't be the sort of freewheeling press conferences that you see in the Oval Office, and indeed the freewheeling press conference that you saw in the Oval Office when Starmer went to visit Washington.
Today it's my privilege to welcome the Prime Minister of a very special place, the United Kingdom, to the White House. The Prime Minister and I have gotten off to an outstanding start. The U.S. and U.K. have a special relationship, very special, really like no other, passed down through the centuries. And we're going to keep it that way. We're going to keep it very strong, as it is.
British side will want this lockdown very tightly controlled. They just don't want anything to go wrong.
Well, Oliver, looking at the policy areas, clearly this has come at a time when it really matters to Keir Starmer that this state visit goes well. He really does need a win. What are the potential areas where he might get one? I mean, starting, I suppose, with trade. What should we be looking out for?
So I think the picture with trade actually has changed in the last few days. Certainly if you talk to people last week, they were quite optimistic that they were going to get an improved trade deal on the one that was struck with the Trump administration in May. Now, back then they agreed to waive tariffs on UK car exports to the United States. They also talked about eliminating tariffs on steel and aluminium exports. But in the last couple of days, that progress appears not quite to have unravelled, but certainly to be much less good than it was previously. Because the big mistake that was made in May was that while there was this outline agreement to eliminate tariffs on steel and aluminium exports, there was always going to be a quota, i.e. a limit for the amount of steel and aluminium that could be exported to the US without paying tariffs.
Right.
But that quota wasn't nailed down. And the difficulty that the UK side has had is in the negotiations to try and negotiate this quota, the Americans have said, we don't want to give you a big quota at all. We actually want it to be a smaller quota than what you're currently selling to us. Now, if you don't get tariff-free, you then go up to 50%, which is a huge whack. And so where we have ended up, we think, is that both sides have agreed that the current tariff rate on steel and aluminium exports will remain at 25%. So no tariff-free exports at all. Now, the UK government would argue, well, look, everyone else is paying 50% tariffs. So this still gives us a competitive advantage against other countries. And what's more, there's no quota, so we can sell as much as we like. And this actually is a better outcome. But Starmer did say the trade deal, when it was signed in May, would eliminate tariffs on steel and aluminium exports. And it ain't doing that. So I think it's not a brilliant picture. There's one other area that the government was hopeful of getting some progress on. They wanted to remove the 10% tariff, which is a sort of global tariff, if you will, on whiskey, possibly salmon as well, sort of key UK exports.
Very much the Scottish market.
Indeed, and John Sweeney, the First Minister of Scotland, went to the Oval Office, accompanied by Peter Mandelson in one of his last acts as ambassador, to try and persuade Trump that he should do this deal. Now,
did it work?
We don't know for certain, but the mood music ain't great. So it's possible that they don't get that either. So I think there's a lot of expectation management going on, but certainly at the moment, the deal doesn't sound as good as it might have done sort of 7 days ago.
So Oliver, we were all looking at trade as potentially one of the benefits of this state visit. Now it doesn't look like that's going to happen. What else might be an upside? You know, if we're looking for positives, people are talking quite a lot about the number of tech giants who are coming as part of Trump's entourage. What are we expecting to see there?
Yeah, I mean, tech is the thing that certainly for the UK side, they want to talk about and they want to sort of trumpet, as it were. There is going to be some pretty significant investments by huge companies like OpenAI, the chip maker Nvidia, Microsoft, Google, and, you know, that investment will be very important. But again, the question is, what are the Americans getting in return for that investment? And at the moment, we don't really know the answer to that question. We know that one of the things that particularly big tech companies in America are really sort of het up about is the UK's copyright rules, which make it hard to train AI models on material that is subject to copyright, and they want those laws and rules loosened.
So definitely keep an eye on tech regulation and where that goes as a result of this. What about Ukraine? Because that has been an area where Number 10 has been trying to lobby Washington. Many European leaders have been trying to get Donald Trump on side. Are we expecting any movement there?
I don't think, and I stand to be proved wrong, that we will get any particular public movement on Ukraine as a result of the state visit. They will probably be asked about it. And I think, first and foremost, what do the British want? They want a recommitment by Donald Trump to NATO's security. They'll want Trump to sort of state clearly that America stands full square behind NATO against any potential Russian incursion. But the real substantive bit of the talks will be around sanctions. NATO allies, particularly France, Germany, the UK, want Trump to ratchet up sanctions on Moscow, particularly around oil exports, particularly around secondary sanctions on countries like China and India that are buying very large quantities of oil and gas from Russia. Trump has basically been saying, well, look, we're prepared to do stuff, but you need to act as well, and pointed out that countries like Turkey are buying quite a lot of Russian oil. And he's saying, I'm not going to act unless you do. Now, I think there'll be private discussions about whether there's a way forward on a new package of sanctions against Russia involving the US. That will involve other countries other than the UK, but I think Starmer will want to use that visit to really try and persuade Trump that the best way of bringing Putin to the negotiating table is to turn the ratchet on the Russian economy. And as I say, I'd be a bit surprised if we get any kind of announcement at the end of it, because there are very many moving parts and Britain and the US are only two of those. But I think that will be an important part of the talk.
And that could actually be a potential problem for Keir Starmer too. I mean, if Donald Trump does insist that we place secondary sanctions on China and India, just as we've done a trade deal with the Indians, that could be quite awkward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I sort of sympathise in a way with what Trump is saying, because there is this sort of double standards, that we want Trump to impose these secondary sanctions, but we don't really want to do it ourselves. The counter argument is, well, actually, if the UK did it, it would have almost no impact whatsoever, whereas if the US did it, it would have a really important deterrent effect on India and China that could make them materially change what they do. But nevertheless, I can see when Trump says, well, look, you want me to do this, why the hell aren't you doing it as well?
And what about Gaza? That's the other foreign policy area where there have been disagreements between the approach in the UK and the US. How much is that going to play out in this state visit?
It's tricky because Starmer has made clear that as soon as next week, the UK is going to recognise a Palestinian state, and Trump thinks that that is a mistake. And I think it's quite likely that both men will get asked about it at the press conference, and it would be interesting to see what view Trump takes and how critical he is of the UK for doing this. I think there will be talk about what is the off-ramp from all this, what happens to Gaza after the conflict, and I think they'll try and find some sort of common ground. So I think they'll try and focus on that rather than the cause of more sort of obvious present disagreements.
And Oliver, this visit comes as we've just had a weekend of huge protests across London, huge sort of Unite the Nation marches, lots of flags out. We know that free speech, Nigel Farage, the question of migration are all things that certainly J.D. Vance has talked about when he's been here before too. How much of a problem is that for Keir Starmer, and how much do you think Donald Trump will want to talk about it?
It is a problem, and if you were sitting in Downing Street, it's one of those sort of areas that you would be wargaming. If you go back to when Starmer went to the Oval Office, he was very carefully prepped. He thought long and hard about how to respond if that whole issue of free speech came up, and indeed it did. J.D. Vance raised it, and was quite robust and made the point that, we do have strong free speech protections in the UK, but there's a difference between free speech and hate speech. And I think there will be similar preparations going on in Downing Street today. But I think if the question of free speech comes up, Starmer has little choice but to be quite robust, because not least, if he's seen to be giving ground to Trump on that, it just makes him look weak. It go down very badly with the Labour Party and moderate, perhaps left-of-centre voters more broadly. I think he will be quite robust. But yeah, it is something they'll be concerned about.
And Oliver, for you and for everyone in the lobby, for all the Westminster watchers who will be analysing every moment of this state visit, how will you judge if it's been a success? What should we be looking out for?
I think you've got to look at two things, and one is definitely the more important. It's the substance. What has actually been agreed? Going back to what you were talking about earlier, about this was the card we had to play. We did it with great fanfare, the letter, this is a great honour. We're doing what we do best. We're putting on a royal show for Trump because we know that's what he wants. We're not doing that because we like him. We're doing that because we think it's in our interests and we want something. So the question is, what did we want? What have we got? To a point, has it been worth it? And then the sort of second thing is, you're going to be looking at the kind of mood of the whole thing. What is their relationship like now? Is Trump as complimentary about Starmer as he has been in the past? What does he say about the UK? What does he say about NATO? All the things that we care about. Where is Trump's head after this visit? And so those are much harder things to judge, really, than the substance of the deals that have been worked on in the back rooms for many months. But they will, it will be important.
That was Oliver Wright, the Times policy editor, and before that, Katy Balls, our Washington editor and currently State Visit watcher. We'll have live coverage of the State Visit online at thetimes.com with updates all day on Times Radio. The producers today were Edith Rousselot and Shabnam Grewal. The executive producer was Kate Lamble, and sound design and theme composition were by Maula Seto. Do leave us a review if you can, and drop us a line if you want to get in touch. We're at thestory@thetimes.com. Thanks for listening. We'll be back tomorrow.